everybody. Thank you so much for coming to our session. This session is called Confluent Critical Listening and Audio Composing, Reading and Writing Podcasts in the Secondary English Classroom. My name is Shanetia Clark. I'm an Associate Professor of Literacy at Salisbury University. We have Jason Griffith. He is a professor at Penn State. And we have Joe Sweet, who is a professor at University of North Carolina in Pembroke.
Hello.
Jason and Joe will encourage critical listening of podcasts in the classroom by sharing findings from a two-part study analyzing S-Town podcast and the Serial Podcast Season 3. Next, we have Alex Corbitt, who is a doc student at Boston College and former middle school teacher. Alex will share 4 performance tasks using podcasts or audio recordings that teachers can consider for their own classrooms. And lastly, we have Will Fassbender, assistant professor at Montana State. Will walks us through using 2 tools, Anchor and Zoom, to record podcasts with students.
Hi, everybody.
After these presentations, they're going to be a nice panel discussion, and we encourage you to reach out to us after the session if you have other questions and comments. So, without further ado,
welcome, everybody, to NCTE 2020. Very sorry we couldn't be in person together in Denver, Colorado this year. But if you're stopping by this presentation, we're glad to take a couple minutes with you and thankful for you checking out our work. My name is Jason Griffith. I'm an assistant professor at Penn State.
And I'm Joe Sweet. I'm an assistant professor at UNC Pembroke.
And Joe and I are going to share with you a little bit of work today. And in this broader panel, we thought we would come together with Shanetia, Will, and Alex to present a sort of multifaceted approach to using podcasts in the classroom. So Alex is going to share some approaches that he used with podcasting with middle schoolers. Will's going to share some resources that you can use as a teacher if you're interested in incorporating podcasting and having your students record their own podcast. So our role is to kind of share with you some of the research that we've been doing, some of the inquiry we've been doing around podcasts, and use that to sort of set up some hopefully useful thinking regarding critical listening. So we call this Confluent Critical Listening for Reading Podcasts in the Secondary English Classroom. So both Joe and I come to this work as podcast fans. So we enjoy podcasts, and we recognize them as an effective medium of narrative nonfiction alongside memoirs and journalistic writing, alongside documentary films, all the great forms that narrative nonfiction is taking in this day and age. Some of my personal favorites lately are Song Exploder. I love getting inside the heads of musical artists and thinking of the different tools that they use and their different mentors and techniques for putting a song together. And I'm really excited that podcast, one of my favorites, is now a Netflix series, so we can actually see some of that work take place. It adds a visual element. And I think Code Switch is one of the most important modern podcasts right now. I definitely don't miss an episode. It gives me a lot of social context on race and culture with the recent unrest, and just a really important podcast that I think is rightfully growing in popularity and importance, and would be a great tool for use in the classroom. And Joe, I don't know if you want to take a minute to share yours as well.
Sure. I mean, I agree with you 100% on Code Switch and its applicability to ELA classrooms. Snap Judgment, I think, also does a really nice job of narrative nonfiction, investigative journalism, and storytelling. One of the things I like about it so much is that it's merging all of those things together, and you really don't know what you're going to get. And The Last Archive is exactly, that's a historian, Joe Lepore, is looking at the death of truth, which, given the context of the world, to me has been really fascinating. As we kind of think with what it means to be a critical listener, especially, and what truth claims are there, and how we, as educators and as people who take in these podcasts as pedagogical, like, what does it mean to be critical, and how that has changed across decades. So.
You remind me, I Snap Judgment had a Halloween episode that I saw in my Stitcher feed and didn't get a chance to listen to yet. So I want to go back and listen to that. I think that'll be a fun episode. So that's us as personal listeners. Podcasts are obviously something that we spend a lot of time listening to and thereby by thinking about. as well. And then taking that into our teacher hat, as English educators, we also recognize that there's a great potential for podcasts as high interest relevant text in the secondary classroom. And we're not alone with this. There's been a lot of scholarship in the past 5 years, a lot of evidence that teachers are using podcasts in various ways in the classroom. So for example, Godsey reported a 650% increase in podcast-related educational materials on Teachers Pay Teachers in 2015, which was the year after Serial Season 1. We're going to talk a little bit about Serial Podcast Season 3. But Serial Season 1 was one of the most viral podcasts that really brought this genre, not just it in and of itself being a fantastic story, but really brought this genre mainstream in many ways, telling the story of Adnan Syed and his conviction for the murder of his high school girlfriend, Heyman Lee. Then Wen and Drew talk about how podcasts have on-demand accessibility. So the fact that we can access these through Spotify, through Stitcher, through whatever podcast app, through Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, things like that. The fact that we can access them right on our devices and listen to them anywhere. That on-demand accessibility of podcasts contributes to their popularity in the classroom and allows us we can listen together as a class or independently and at their own pace. With their own headphones. So it has a lot of pedagogical variety, of pedagogical variance in terms of how we approach those. Then Wen and Godsey also suggest the production details. So if we think about the multimodality, the multimedia factors of podcasts, the production details, right? The incorporation of background music, sound effects, the shifts in narration between various characters, between host and participant, and the different ways that we can kind of keep things interesting with those different production details. They help engage us and help our students maintain their attention. So these are a great tool in the classroom for modern, relevant, high interest use.
Sorry, go ahead, Jason.
I was going to say, Joe's going to tell us about critical media literacy.
Yeah, so I think partially because of these, not to make a pun, but this confluence of events that created the popularity of podcasts in ELA classrooms, NCTE began, I guess, a couple of years ago, did the resolution on critical literacy in politics and media. And the top bullet in those probably 10 bullets is here. And it's to promote pedagogy and scholarly curricula in English and related subjects that instruct students in civic and critical literacy, going beyond the basic reading comprehension to the thinking skills that enable students to analyze and evaluate sophisticated persuasive technologies in all texts, genres, and types of media. And so how this is a mixture of critical listening, classic and new literacies, and composition is kind of one of our entries into this project, and how we're using these things in the classroom and what they mean for ELA instruction in the classroom.
So clearly, there's a lot of there's a lot of basis. There's teachers already doing this. There's literature behind podcasts in the classroom. NCTE has those critical media listening standards. So the question is, what do we mean by critical listening? Well, for Joe and I, the way that we've talked about the research we're about to share, for us, it's about moving beyond just incorporating podcasts and say, yeah, we do podcasts in class. We use these high interest new texts in class because we have to give credit where credit's due. And classrooms which continue to be pretty print text heavy, using canonical classics, for a teacher to engage students with a podcast, there is some significance there. And we applaud that, we salute that, we see that as significant. But it's not enough. A lot of the literature out there right now in terms of research of using podcasts in classrooms is just that folks are using them for engagement. Teachers are using them because students are interested in them, which I think if we're just using them because they're high interest, sometimes we miss those critical questions. So what we're trying to encourage is moving beyond just this high interest factor of podcasts to encouraging students to critically and reflexively engage with podcast content, how they're produced, their different production features, and their context. What's the story behind the podcasts? And bring those critical questions to bear, the same that we might print-based literatures. So that leads us to our specific study, which basically, this is a two-part discourse analysis that's still unfolding for us. We presented the first half of this at 8ERA in 2018. Is that right, Joe?
19, I think.
2019. And then the second part, besides presenting a little bit of it here, we'll be presenting that at LRA this coming year as well. And hopefully both of these are in development in terms of manuscripts that we hope to be getting out into the world very soon after this presentation. But basically the first half, the one that we did for 8ERA in 2019 was a discourse analysis of S-Town podcasts, which we'll tell you a little bit more contextually in a minute. But those of you that listen to podcasts might remember this one because it broke a lot of records for downloads. It got a lot of attention in the wake of, this came after Serial season 1, so it kind of rode on the coattails of Serial's popularity. But basically, this tells a story of the eccentric savant John McLemore, who lives down in Woodstock, Alabama, which he deems a shit town, hence S-Town. And Brian Reed is the producer who walks us through this story, interviewing John McLemore and a lot of his friends and neighbors in this area. So as we were listening to this, the question that popped up that we were really curious at investigating through a discourse analysis is we were wondering about Reed's positionality as the producer and how he sort of arrives in S-Town as a setting, as the host or interviewer, and his relationship to the folks that he features, the folks that he interviews. So we're looking at that relationship and that positionality between the host and producer and the featured interviewees. Then that led us into a second part, which we're currently working on, which is from Serial season 3. So Sarah Koenig, after the popularity of that season 1 with Adnan Syed, she went on to do a sequel which had Bo Bergdahl, the famous case of military desertion. That was season 2. And then season 3, she took a slightly different approach where rather than having just one common story told in many installments, she parked herself in the same setting, which was the Justice Center complex just outside of Cleveland, Ohio. And she tells lots of little stories that are happening in that place over a period of time. So we were wondering, one of the things that struck us about this that we thought bore further investigation was about Koenig's method of gathering consent. There's some very interesting places where we see how she gets consent for her interviews. And that was something that we wanted to investigate and trouble a little further. Joe, is there anything I missed on this slide that you wanted to add?
No, I think we'll cover it.
Yeah, so Joe's going to tell us a little bit about how these podcasts that we're investigating sort of fit together.
Right. So as you can see there, This American Life has been around for quite a while now, 25 years, and they have every episode has a theme, right? One of my favorites of all time is the one on middle school, is the theme, and then they kind of tell different stories about middle school in three or four different acts. And then Sarah Koenig, she was a producer for This American Life. And then Serial was a serial release also, where they would do each season a week one episode a week until the season was finished. And then Brian Reed, also a producer for This American Life, got this call from McLemore, went to Alabama, and thinking that he was going to be doing something that might turn into an act or a show for This American Life, and then it kind of grew too large for just one episode, and it became 7 episodes that were all released at the same time. So you could binge listen to S-Town, which was much different than what This American Life and Serial were doing as far as accessibility to the episodes.
So Joe's also going to tell us a little bit about, we applied the same method to both of these. So Joe will get us started here, and then I'll punctuate some of this as well.
Yeah, so we used a discourse analysis. We're going to show an example of a transcript in a minute. But discourse analysis, we're looking at syntactical moves and language and word choice that the speakers are using. And you kind of break up what would normally be a paragraph narrative into various lines about when people's thoughts shift, like beats in theaters, the way that I think of it, when objectives might shift, to look very, very closely at very, very small pieces of text, right? So we're not looking at really long transcripts. We're choosing really particular moments to look at very closely.
And the way that we went about finding the data, finding these scenes from this from these different shows, is it really came out of our interest as listeners, right? Our positionality as listeners is Joe and I, as friends, as former English teachers, as current literacy researchers, we were listening to these podcasts and we were just talking about them, and just the way that casual listeners do. There's something that strikes you of interest, and you bring it up in conversation. And I think the important part of the method here, though, is those things that we bring up in conversation, those things that kind of rub us in a certain way that we want to investigate a little bit further. Then we delve into those. We test that pattern. So it's basically something that we call stumble data. Which, Joe, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about stumble data. I know you turned me on to this particular resource.
Sure, yeah. So Sven Brinkman is a qualitative researcher, and he writes about stumble data as both. It's a double entendre. It's a pun that's intended. It's data that you stumble upon, like, oh, look at that, I didn't know that was there, and it's also data that trips you up, right? So you trip over it. It's, I think, when I think about these moments that we chose for discourse, or these aha, like what is that? What's the significance of that moment as we were listening? Are the things that we tripped over.
So that's actually something, as we talked about it, I started coming up with this term, calling it fortuitous listening. Whereas it's this idea where, the way that conversation sometimes you're having, and the things that you're listening to and watching, the way that you're sort of curating your own content, the way that those hit in a sort of aha moment in your head, and then you take that pattern back and you start testing it, right? So I was listening to S-Town. I was doing a lot of work with narrative nonfiction generally. I was talking to folks like Joe about this, and the right combination came together to kind of in a confluence in my head, to use the NCTE theme term, where something just struck me in terms of the way that Brian Reed was talking with some of the participants that I think bore out further investigation. So the other thing that Brinkman talks about in stumble data is this notion of an abductive process. So it's kind of the midway point between an inductive or a deductive process. We're not starting with an absolute hypothesis, and we're not starting completely from the data, right, and just letting the data emerge with the themes, but it's kind of an in-between, where we have a little bit of data, the stumble data, that we gathered through fortuitous listening from these patterns. And then based on that, with its sort of aha moment, we're going to take that, we're going to develop a little rough theory, a little rough hypothesis, and then we're going to run that through the ringer with the discourse analysis. We're going to bring it in conversation with a couple scenes. And then the idea is that we can present this pattern, and you as a reader can decide whether or not that holds true in your context, or whether there are other places where this applies, or other places where you can challenge it. Does that make sense, Joe?
Yeah, it makes sense to me, but we've been talking about it for 2 years.
Well, we'll hope it made sense to you as well, because we're going to keep rolling here in the interest of time. And this slide just shows an example of what we mean by, in G's version of discourse analysis, what we call discourse organization. So basically, by listening to a piece of audio data and transcribing it in this way, and breaking it up into stanzas, and numbering the lines, noting whether there's a pause, whether it's the end of a thought, or whether it continues going into a follow-up thought. Oops. Got to go the right way there. So that's the way these lines work, is if it's a single line, it can that thought continues on to the next line. If it's a double line, it's the conclusion of a thought, and then labeling each stanza with sort of a heading. Zooming in on discourse in that way, and sort of categorizing it and giving it different labels, and even labeling the whole scene in terms of what it is. It really gives us a clear picture of the different moves that are made here in terms of discourse. Joe, what else would you say about discourse organization?
I mean, for me, this is a really important part of the analysis, is deciding where these full stop versus leading to the next thing versus changing a beat where we would have a new stanza. Like, that's kind of how the analysis and G's discourse analysis works. That's it. That's doing it. There's nothing really after that except interpreting what this stuff means. So
what we're going to do is we're going to share with you just a piece of the two analyses that we did. So what we're going to do, if we were live in person at NCTE, we might play the audio clip. But since this is recorded, we don't want to get in trouble with the powers that be. What we're going to do is we're going to take the parts of the characters. So in each of the following scenes, we'll play the role of the journalist and one of the participants, respectively. So this first one comes from S-Town episode 5, which is titled "Nobody Will Ever Change My Mind About It." That's the name of the episode title. And this scene that we transcribed features the journalist, Brian Reed, talking about and to a character named Tyler and a resident of the featured S-Town of Woodstock, Alabama. So Tyler in this scene talks about his reasoning and choice of action in response to an alleged theft. And Brian responds to Tyler directly, as well as to listeners separately. So we're going to read this scene for you, and then we'll talk a little bit more about what it means. So I'm going to take the part of Brian Reed, and Joe's going to take the part of Tyler. And then there's this story, which gave me a vivid sense of how Tyler sees things. He'd recently hired a guy to do some electrical work on the house he's building. And according to Tyler, the guy stole 2 of his grandfather's old guns out of Tyler's home. So Tyler came up with a whole plan. He contacted the guy and acted like he hadn't noticed, told him there was more work to be done, and tricked the guy into coming back over to his house, where he was waiting for him with a rifle in hand, and walked him over to his shed.
I had a chair sitting out there in that shed and some damn snips, hedge clipper snips, propped up beside it, waiting. And I was going to cut a finger or 2 off. I know I was going to snip fingers until he had my guns delivered back here.
Tyler, really?
Yeah, really.
At first, I thought maybe Tyler was just saying something ridiculous, embellishing him. But I asked him about it, and he's clear with me. He was serious about this, and going into that shed, he had every intention of following through. He says he did have a change of heart once he got the guy into the shed and ended up instead whipping the guy across the face with the gun and beating him silly rather than dismembering him. But he hasn't had a change of heart about the appropriateness of his plan. As we discuss it, in retrospect, he still thinks it would be a completely acceptable thing to do given the situation, which I find unsettling. You thought it would be okay to cut his fingers off?
Buddy, if he thought it was okay to come in here and steal my granddaddy's gun that is irreplaceable, then yeah, I was going to fix a thief. I believe it would have took 1 finger. And then them guns would have been found. If 1 finger had a went, it wouldn't have took 2 or 3. I guarantee you.
I kept questioning Tyler, trying to understand why he thought this was okay. But nothing he said did quite make me understand. And I realized it was probably going to stay that way. Eventually, as I'm saying goodbye, about to hang up the phone, Tyler asked me this.
All right,
man. Oh, sorry, that's me. As you can see, Brian Reed's shifting from talking to the audience and talking to Tyler directly. So this is another one of those shifts. He's talking to the audience, and he said, as he's hanging up the phone, and we turn back to his conversation with Tyler. All right, man, I'm going to let you go. Can you just do one favor for me?
You don't see me being a bad person at all, do you? Do you see me being a bad person?
Do I?
Yeah.
No, man. I see you as a complicated, normal person, you know? I disagree with some of your decisions, but you've had a very different life experience than I've had.
Yeah?
Why? Do you feel like a bad person sometimes?
No, I just want to know what people think of me because, hell, I'd do anything for anybody. I'd help somebody goddamn any way I could. And I ain't about to rob nobody, steal from nobody or nothing like that. People make me out to be that they treat me like Rodney. That's what it is. That's the way it's been my whole life, basically.
To Tyler, Rodney, his dad, that's a criminal. And that's how Tyler measures being a good person. Is he acting like Rodney?
Yeah, I have a temper, but I don't beat on my kids or my wife or my mama or my sister. He does. I've made some mistakes for damn sure, but damn, I wish I had a little better guidance.
So that ends the scene that we transcribed there. And I think it's a very interesting one in terms of how Brian relates to Tyler, and also because of those production shifts, which are easier to hear if you're listening to the actual audio, but the way that he shifts from talking to us as radio listeners to Tyler directly, and how there's a contrast between those those different things. So actually that jumps down here to the second bullet point, which is something we term subtle othering. We call subtle othering the way that Brian tells Tyler one thing, and then he tells us something different. Tyler asks him straight up, do you think I'm a bad person? And Brian says back to him, no, I think you're a normal person, complicated normal person. But basically, in the way that he presents this story to us at the very beginning about how Tyler's way of thinking was to cut the guy's finger off with hedge clippers, it's to sensationalize it. It's like, look at how crazy this is and how I couldn't possibly imagine this. So I asked him about it, and he's still going to do it. So he's showcasing this and sensationalizing this extreme moment to us as listeners. And then he shares with us this clip of audio where Tyler says, do you see me being a bad person? And he says, no, you're completely normal. So like there's a difference there. And in doing that, like maybe Brian Reed's trying to be generous. Maybe he's trying to, he feels some kinship with him. He feels some friendship, and he's trying not to betray him. But in doing that, there's a sense of subtle othering, which is like, look at how crazy this guy's thinking is. And then it's like, it puts us sort of in league with Brian's perspective. But in analyzing this a little bit, it's almost sort of like Tyler's presented as a spectacle, that sort of thing. This becomes more important if we go back to the first bullet point and sort of zoom out and we think about the context of this show. So Brian's coming down from New York City. He's urban. He's an outsider to this community. He's a journalist. And then he's coming down to this S-town in Alabama, which is rural, it's southern. Tyler's an insider. He's a resident of this community. So when we sort of zoom out and look at this different context, so we started sort of referring to this as what we call the Truman Capote effect. If you're familiar with In Cold Blood, this is exactly what Truman Capote does by reading the story about these murderers. And was that in Kansas, Joe? Do you remember?
It was the Midwest. I don't remember if it was Kansas or Nebraska, but it was one of those.
So he reads the story about these murderers, and he goes out and actually befriends them to get them to tell this really personal version of the story, which he turns into this foundational piece of literary nonfiction, a foundational piece of sort of modern creative nonfiction. But it's considered controversial in looking back at it because pretty much after he got his story and published his book, his relationship with these guys ended. So you could argue he was using them for the story. So when we see this journalist who's often white, northern, urban, privileged in various ways, presenting the stories of participants who are marginalized in different ways, that's what we're calling the Truman Capote effect. And we see that at work here with Brian Reed and Tyler. So of course we mentioned In Cold Blood, but I think you could also apply this to Friday Night Lights, where we have a New York City or a Boston journalist, a Northeast journalist heading down to rural Texas to document high school football. If you're familiar with Serial, we have an incarcerated youth of color and a northern white journalist coming down to share that story. If you're familiar with Last Chance U, the show about community college football, similar thing. Making a Murderer, similar thing. All of those journalistic teams are privileged in various ways in telling the stories of marginalized participants. So that leads us to suggest that a lot of podcasts and narrative nonfiction in the form of documentary series and things like that are actually functioning sort of like old school ethnographies. They're colonizing or othering in ways that are not too different than Margaret Mead 100 years ago. And Joe, what more would you say about this?
I mean, that's pretty much it. It's like in ethnography, there's like the Western knower who comes in and looks at the native, right, with their lens on how the Western knower is the truth teller and the truth sayer, right? And so what the non-Western person is doing is not valid, right? And I think that it's not quite so clear in podcast journalism and narrative nonfiction, but it's certainly, the parallels are, that there are some correlations there.
So that leads us into the second part of our discourse analysis, which is on Serial Season 3. So in episode 4 of Serial Season 3, this is called A Bird in Jail is Worth Two on the Street. So in this scene, the journalist Sarah Koenig describes her process of obtaining consent to record a conversation with a recently released suspect, Davon Holmes, in the murder of a baby. So in this case, we're going to switch, and Joe will be the journalist, and I'll be the participant, Davon.
Everyone wants to solve the case of the 5-month-old baby. So what happened? After all that effort, wrong guy. What happened? Why did the police think it was Davon in the first place? And what happened over the course of that year to make the state let him go?
I heard about all the kids being killed that were in the town.
Right?
It was a big issue.
Right?
It was all over the news.
This is Devon Holmes. Did you know that there was gossip that you'd done it?
No, that's what's freaking me out. I didn't. Never thought my name was in that situation.
When I knocked on his door, he'd only been out of jail for a couple of months. He was living at home with his mother. I had a speech in my head about why he should talk to me, but there was no need. He agreed right away, as if he'd been waiting for someone to come along and ask what the heck happened. I was not able to ask the police what the heck happened. The detectives weren't allowed to talk to me. In fact, no Cleveland officials, no police officials, no one from the mayor's office would agree to an on-the-record interview for this series. I, frankly, never encountered a city government with a jaw locked up tighter than Cleveland's. They wanted nothing to do with us, which is too bad, because Cleveland has some interesting leaders with ideas and lots to say about their city. Just not me. So, while I did meet the homicide detectives in charge of Aviel Wakefield's case, I could not ask them, how much did you know about Devon Holmes before you arrested him? Instead, I went to Devon. He started at the beginning, right after Thanksgiving, 2015.
Okay, so we'll pause the scene right there. So in this particular discourse analysis, we analyze a couple different more scenes. But the purpose of this, what caught our attention in terms of the stumble data, in terms of the fortuitous listening, is as I was listening to this, I really, obviously she overemphasizes, Sarah Koenig overemphasizes how no one else would talk to her, including Devon's lawyers, right? No one else will go on the record. And then she's like, I wanted to figure out what happened. No one would talk to me. That's such a shame. But the thing that she tells us, I think it's in a different scene. I don't think we read it here, but she tells us it's still an active murder case. So part of the reason no one will go on the record is because even though they've let Devon go, he was locked up and then they let him go. So it seems pretty certain that they're going to not consider him as a suspect anymore, but that's not certain because the case is still ongoing. So his lawyers say, no, we're not going to talk on the record. It's an ongoing case. So she walks up to Devon Holmes' door, knocks on it, says, tell me what happened. And he was kind of excited to tell the story. And this is what we want to trouble a little bit because this is troubling to us. This is bothersome to us. Since his lawyers declined to talk, they probably have some legal knowledge that that possibly would be protective for their client. Right. And we also, in one of the other scenes that we look at, it's actually a discourse analysis of a scene from a documentary that was made for HBO called The Case Against Adnan Syed. And it's the fallout from season 1 of Serial. And in a really interesting scene, they actually interview a number of folks who appeared in season 1 of Serial, and they discuss the fallout in their lives from appearing in this podcast. So they talk about how they had trouble sleeping, and they got harassed. People would say things about them online or judge them to be uncredible or say various things about them. So they suffered personally and socially because of their participation in the podcast. And because this was so early, they didn't even really know what they were signing up for. They didn't know what a podcast was or how popular it would be. So if we put these couple things together, we can tell that there are, in some cases, we don't know what it means for Devon Holmes unless there would be some type of follow-up like that. But we do know that there's consequences, social consequences, personal consequences for participation in podcasts. And we know that that's happened with other folks. And we know that there are other folks, for good reasons, his lawyers specifically, who won't go on the record, and he does. So that brings up the question of, is this ethical for Sarah Koenig to ask him to put his story on record for the purpose of entertainment? So this leads us to the second point, which is that there's a tension between the value of a public narrative and what we might call individual privacy or protection. So I actually think Sarah Koenig says in other episodes, there's another scene that we analyze that we include in our discourse analysis, where she talks about her purpose for doing this work. And it's to expose injustices in stories like Devon's, and especially other youth who get unfairly locked up and don't get due process. She says, the only thing that I can do is report the hell out of it as a journalist, make sure these stories are brought to light. So she does think that she's bringing these stories to light for the public good. So maybe we can change the system. Maybe enough of us can hear about it, make some sort of collective cry for change in the judicial system, The question comes, is that at personal cost to some of the participants? Could some of them end up getting hurt personally in the service of that grander narrative? So this is a really interesting ethical tension, I think. It also leads us to think about the difference between journalistic consent, which we see right here on the record. Journalistic consent, you ask, hey, can I record you talking about your experience with X, Y, or Z? In Devon's case, can we talk to you about why you were accused of this murder and why you were locked up? They say yes, you record. We have to go through a few more hoops when we're conducting educational research for IRB, and the whole purpose of IRB goes back to those colonizing practices of old school ethnography and othering our participants. IRB wants to make sure our participants are safe and that we've thought through the ramifications in the way that we're not seeing in this example. Joe, what else would you add?
The only thing I would add is we've talked about this before, like the ethics of social science research versus the ethics of journalism. For social scientists, the ethics are to protect the participant, whereas in journalism, it appears that the ethics are to the story, right? You have an ethical responsibility to tell the story, whereas we have, as social science research, an ethical responsibility not to harm our participants.
Which ties us back to the context of NCTE and English education, because these are really interesting questions to discuss with students in the context of English education. So we want to be clear that the purpose of this work is not to denigrate these journalists or their work, because we actually really enjoy their podcasts. We're obviously listened to them because we were entertained by them and found value in the product. And the idea is whether or not we're critical of them, listeners are already listening to these in droves. All of these podcasts broke records in terms of the number of downloads. So there's an argument to be made that if folks are listening to them in real life, we should bring them critically into the classroom to engage with. And despite their problematic elements, as we talked about, there is clearly value. There's clearly value in these stories and bringing these stories to light in different areas, as well as instructional value in troubling these texts and bringing these critical questions to students' awareness with valuable educational opportunity, a valuable opportunity for instruction. So that's what we're trying to do through this work, is encourage teachers to engage in the type of critical media literacy thinking that we're doing, which allows them to dig into the questions and issues like those we presented and generate their own abductive processes. What things do they sort of trouble in their listening and viewing, their fortuitous listening and viewing, and how might they bring those into the classroom? Which leads us into our final slide, which is considerations for teachers who are utilizing podcasts in the classroom already are interested in doing that. We would encourage you to engage your students in your critical wonderings. Point out what you notice as a listener or viewer. Ask students what they notice in response, in turn, and to share that with their classmates and with you. Use your wonderings to foster this critical discussion, to model this critical discussion. So for example, the three that we talked about in this two-part discourse analysis are the positionality of the journalist and the host to the featured participants, what we call the Truman Capote effect, where they're coming from and how they might be subtly othering their participants by telling their story in a certain way from a certain context. And then in the second example, how journalists gain consent for interviews and what are the ramifications of that process. But of course, you probably will find others and be able to engage in your own abductive processes. And then of course, after you model your own and engage students with those, with your wonderings critically, you can encourage them to bring their own into the discussion and encourage students to trouble the nonfiction media that they encounter independently. What are they noticing? What are they bothered by in their own fortuitous listening and fortuitous viewing? Have them engaged in their own abductive processes with their classmates. Joe, any closing comments?
I think you covered it, man. I think that yeah, I mean, as the podcasts are being used more and more, we need to make sure that we're teaching more and more in classrooms. We need to make sure that we're also teaching students to be critical in their listening and in their reading of them.
Thank you everyone for your time and for paying attention to this presentation. I hope you found some value in it. And if you're interested in following up, we'd love to know what you think. Our contact information is on this slide. Have a great virtual NCTE this year, everyone. Hope to see you next year back in person. Take care.
See ya.
Hey everyone, my name is Alex Corbitt. Thank you so much for coming to our on-demand session today. It's a pleasure to kind of share this time with you all. Today I'm going to share 4 different performance tasks that use some form of either podcasting or audio recording to capture thinking and discussion. Just as a short caveat before we get started, whenever I think about using podcasting or voice recording in the classroom space or with kids, I always think to what purpose or for what purpose. It's not enough to center the technology if it doesn't in some way build criticality, community, or shape thinking in a way that other modalities might not. As I go through some of these different projects, if you'll excuse me, there is some construction going on across the way, and I'm hearing a dog barking out in the back, but hopefully it should be okay. I taught a teen activism course with about 15 kids, and our first unit, actually chosen by the students and curated by the students, was a unit called Racism in Society. And one of our essential questions was, how do education institutions perpetuate racism? One of the many texts that we investigated during this unit and thought with was a short documentary by Spike Lee titled Two Fists Up. This documentary follows a group of youth activists who resisted and protested against institutional racism at the college level, and the way they navigated the optics of those protests, sometimes even when the media tried to bend the narrative. So as we prepared to watch this short documentary, the students generated discussion questions, and they refined them and iterated on them as we watched the text. Subsequently, we used our phones and the voice recording app to interview each other with those questions in groups of 2 or 3, and then subsequently sharing those interviews out with the class. We used this project as a way to generate questions, promote robust listening, and to kind of develop our stances on issues like institutional racism with peers. A second way I've used podcasting and voice recording was in my involvement with Voices from the Middle podcast. I ran a segment that centered student and classroom teacher voices. Some of our other segments centered YA authors and teacher authors, but this particular segment tried to center voices at the local and school level. A couple years back, I recorded a segment episode with 5 kids in my 7th grade literacies course. I asked them 2 simple questions. 1, when do you love writing the most in school? And 2, when do teachers get in the way? The student responses highlighted a variety of takeaways that I found super, super interesting. First, they explained how they like writing when it includes a variety of modalities. For example, video, audio, and especially the visual arts, such as drawing. Also, the kids in my class really loved when writing was embodied and performed. So, for example, we had a slam poetry unit where there was a performative aspect to it, and this was something that the youth really, really, really enjoyed. Finally, a lot of the kids had mentioned that they really like when literacies are interdisciplinary. For example, there was one teacher on our team, the science teacher, who was wonderful, and she taught students various cycles like the water cycle and the life cycle of a cell or a virus through storytelling, and kids made graphic novels and short narratives tracing the cycles through the perspective of a droplet of water or a cell or a virus, and adding that narrative element they really, really enjoyed. For this recording and this interview, the audience was me and my colleagues. We listened back to these interviews, but also for other teachers more broadly beyond our school. A third way I've used audio recording and podcasting was with some pre-service teachers with whom I worked last year. Our mode of reflecting on our teaching and our learning was through podcasting. So the pre-service teachers actually together as a group created podcast episodes where they reflected on issues of equity and pedagogy. They centered their emerging questions as budding educators. They kind of traced daily lessons that they've learned throughout their experiences. And finally, they shared stories and built on each other's thinking in dialogue. In this way, we tried to also build robust discourse around our reflexive process of becoming teachers. The fourth way I've used audio recording in the classroom has been to reflect on narratives that kids wrote. And I'll go into that a little bit more in a moment. One thing that matters a lot to me is speculative fiction in the classroom, which includes science fiction, fantasy, and horror. And I came to this realization that I really cared a lot about speculative fiction after many years of teaching Edgar Allan Poe in my 7th grade literacies class. I noticed an interesting tension that kids often really like horror stories, but horror stories also contain a lot of tropes that reify racism, ableism, heterosexism, and homophobia. So about a year and a half ago, I designed a project with students to remix Neil Gaiman's text titled The Price. The students creatively reworked the entire story using Dr. Amy Storniolo and Dr. Ebony Elizabeth Thomas's restorying framework. This framework actually teaches kids how to bend aspects of narratives, such as the setting, character identities, the time period, in ways that center students' identities. So we actually use this framework to restory one of Neil Gaiman's texts so that students' identities could be centered and their experiences could be centered in their creative rewritings. Many of my students actually decided to use an app called Texting Story app, and what that does is you create a narrative on your phone in the form of a texting conversation. So you have characters talking to each other and texting each other. Now, that's very different from a traditional written narrative because it doesn't always leave a lot of room for exposition. So the kids had to think of interesting ways to include exposition through dialogue. And to make their thinking and their creative process more explicit, both to themselves as a form of reflection and to me, they conducted something called a retrospective design interview. Basically, retrospective design interviews is like a director's cut commentary. And so as they went back and scrolled through the texting conversation that they made on their phone, they gave a play-by-play about what they were thinking, what they were trying to convey, how they integrated certain little moments of dialogue to show what they wanted to show. And so this both put the kids in a position of authority, commenting on their work as the artist and as the author. And it also, on my end, as the teacher, illuminated their thinking on a craft level, so I could kind of understand where they're at and how they're growing. So those are 4 ways that I've used podcasting and audio recording in the classroom for a variety of educational purposes, for a variety of audience, from students to for their peers, for teachers in the school and beyond. And in addition to the various audiences for whom students recorded their audio, they recorded audio for a variety of purposes: to reflect on their writing process, to give feedback to teachers on moments when writing lessons were most effective and least effective, to work with peers to gain a more critical understanding of issues of race and equity in society, and to share their learning as emerging teachers. So again, as we think about podcasting and voice recording, it's helpful to think about how do we pair these new and emerging technologies that make this work easier with what is the purpose of using these modalities in the classroom setting and beyond. Thank you so much for joining, everybody. It's been great sharing some of these ideas with you all, and I look forward to any feedback that you have for this session. Thanks so much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Will Fassbender, and I am an assistant professor of English education here in beautiful Bozeman, Montana, at Montana State University. And I have the great pleasure of talking to you today about tools for podcasting. So moving a lot of these podcasting ideas into your classroom. And I can tell you, as a former 8th grade teacher in North Carolina, I loved doing podcasts with my students even 10 years ago. I thought it was a really fun activity to do because not only is it a multimodal and a creative way to get students engaged with whatever they're reading and writing, but it's also a great way to encourage different types of voice and students to use that voice in the classroom. And so I know I always enjoyed it. We didn't have nearly the tools a decade ago that you have at your disposal today. So let me talk about one that I really love, and then I'll also give an opportunity to talk about one that may be pretty easy for you to use because of what you have perhaps working under these current conditions. And so we'll talk about how Zoom could also be a tool for you. But before we talk about that, the two tools we're going to talk about today are Anchor and Zoom. So the first one, and the one that I love the most, is Anchor. Anchor is a free app that you can get for free, as I said, on your mobile devices. So there's no subscription there's no cost to download it. There's no subscription fees after you download it. It is free. Okay, and so it is one of those apps that you can get if you have an iPhone. I'm assuming if you have other devices, mobile devices, they usually work because you can purchase them from the Google Play Store. If you have an iPad, I'll demonstrate how to use that. And if you don't have those devices at your disposal, if you're afraid that students may not have the equal access to use that, but they do have computers at their house, they can use a web browser version of it, and it works just as well. What this does, and what I love about Anchor, is that it allows you to record voices and music and sound effects, as well as host and share final podcasts. And so you'll hear me today talk about how it's one-stop shopping. You can create a podcast from beginning to end using Anchor. And if you go to online, it's at anchor.fm. So you can check it out and play around with this tool for a little bit, because I do really believe it is user-friendly, and I think it's also really high quality. So without further ado, let's actually do a quick demonstration with our friend Alex, who you already know. All right, everyone. I'm here with our good friend Alex. Hi, Alex.
Hey, Will.
And today we are going to play around with Anchor very quickly. And one of the things that I really like about Anchor is that you have the ability to now record really nice, rich quality using the Anchor app. And so you'll see there's a whole bunch of options. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit record with friends here in the app. I'm going to invite friends to record with me, so I'll get started. And all I need to do is invite friends. I'm going to hit that. I could email him, use Twitter, Facebook. I can save files, all that sort of stuff. I'm going to send him an invite via email. I figure most of your students will likely have email, so let's give that a shot. There we go. I'm going to send this invite here. And so it's going to go to Alex right now into his email inbox. I could have done it via text as well. So if you just want to have students work on it, they can do it via text message, all those different types of options. But that's what makes it so helpful.
And I just got your email, Will, so I'm going to click on my phone on the link. And then it says choose microphone. And I'm going to use my iPhone microphone. And then I'll click. I don't know if you can see it here.
Kinda, sure.
and then I'll click join recording.
For what it's worth, I am using my iPad. And so you can see how this works across devices. And you're hearing some echo, probably because, let me turn the volume down here, because we have Zoom going and our Anchor going. But we are currently recording. Hey, Alex.
Hello. And what I did was I muted my Zoom on my computer, so I can still see you, but you're hearing my voice through my phone.
Yeah, and how does it sound on your end?
Oh my gosh, it sounds great.
Sounds crystal clear, right? And so now all I have to do is I have to say bye, Alex.
Bye, Will.
And I finish that recording. It says you're done recording. I say, okay, thanks. And now we have the audio processing. And one of the really cool things about Anchor right now is that it has very high quality, as I mentioned. And Alex, where are you right now?
I am in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
And I'm in Bozeman, Montana, which means that there's no more geographic limitations to it. Students don't have to be face-to-face inside a classroom, which obviously is a big challenge right now as well. And so in a second, once this is done rendering, I can share the audio with everybody, and you can hear just how crystal clear the audio is when creating this podcast. So thanks so much for demonstrating with us, Alex.
Thanks, Will. This was good.
One thing that I think is really excellent about Anchor is that now that I have this recording with Alex, I can just hit this plus sign over here, and I can add that to this project. And so now it's the first piece in our recording. But what also makes this really useful is that in addition to that, I could record some more. I could do some voiceover things myself by clicking on that little red button. I can choose this to invite more friends and do some more recording. Here's where all of my recordings are located in this little purple box. I love this new addition, which is adding songs using Spotify. So anything that's in Spotify, you can use as, let's say, theme music. If you want to do some type of project where students are analyzing lyrics and music, they can incorporate that so long as it's in Spotify. I think that makes this incredibly powerful as well. And then, of course, you can have voice messages. And so you could have students perhaps who don't have this. They can just do it via phone. Interludes, this is really cool as well. These are all different examples of just different sounds, different buffer sounds like theme songs and sound effects, those types of things. And those sound effects here are included. So the options that you have with regard to Anchor, I think, are just really powerful because it gives you a lot of different things and it allows you to do this type of teaching and project-based learning using something from distance where people don't actually have to be in the same room at the same time. So I think that makes it very powerful. I don't mean to be too obvious here, and perhaps I'm not giving up any trade secrets that you don't already know, but it's worth pointing out that because Alex and I demonstrated doing our recording in Zoom, and if you may want to keep things simple based on the tools that you're already using in the class, you can use Zoom as a way to record your podcast as well. And so, for example, you'll notice down here is the record button, in case you didn't know that already. You can have students record their podcasts, being able to see each other face to face, which is also very nice whenever doing an interview or just working within a group. And so they can hit record, they can do their recording that way. Of course, it won't have all the bells and whistles that Anchor has. It won't allow them to automatically add music into their podcasts or sound effects. But it will give you pretty good sound quality. And then the nice thing is that once you hit record to end that recording session, it will export the audio right here into a library. So this was recorded on 11/5/2020. And you can take the video, of course, which would be fine. But you can also just take the audio, and then you could have students submit their audio podcasts here without perhaps the music and everything like that. Or they could import this into GarageBand if you're working with Mac, or any other audio programs that you may have access to. And that's another very quick, simple, and easy way for students to record podcasts, simply using a tool that many of you are likely using already, which is Zoom. Of course, if you're using another program, perhaps Microsoft Teams or WebEx or Google Meets, I'm assuming they have similar functionality as well. And you can have students use the tools that they're already using and that they have at their disposal. So now that you've seen the tools, just a few final points here. First and foremost, recording podcasts, I think, has never been easier. And especially now, given COVID and students having to learn from distance, I think that the tools that we've talked about today, both Anchor and Zoom, make it so that podcasts actually work pretty well under these current conditions, because students don't need to share a classroom any longer in order to record these podcasts. In fact, being at distance almost makes it easier with Anchor and Zoom because they can record it in separate spaces, then pull it together. I also, and something that I just in general always try to explain, is that you want to be able to try new tools. Trying new tools is super important. Even if you, the teacher, are not the expert, you have to trust your students and their tech savviness. And even if not everybody in the classroom is particularly tech savvy, you may have one or two experts in the classroom, and you kind of need to lean on them and trust them to be able to help other classmates, perhaps when they get stuck with the technology as well. So I really want to encourage you to try new things, use podcasting. I do think you'll find it quite beneficial in your classroom.
All right, so Will and Alex, let me just tell you, I was really, really intrigued by your sessions and in your discussions, because now, because we're teaching virtually, most of our classes are, I've been thinking about new tools to use to encourage student feedback, to encourage students to think about and create meaning in different kinds of ways. I want to branch out of the PowerPoint and Prezi and things like that. So could you talk a little bit more about you using Anchor, and shout out to you all for doing the live session for us, because it helped ease my mind, because I've been stressing about lots of virtual tools. So just kind of talk about how that came about and some of your thinking and some of the work you've done over the course of the semester.
Well, I can start. I can tell you that Anchor is one of those tools that I've been evangelizing for a couple of years now. I teach a digital tools course for English education students, as well as at NCTE. And inevitably, Anchor typically comes up whenever we have a podcast session, and Alex and I have done a couple of them at this point. And I don't love just like sticking with one particular tool, but Anchor is one of those things where it's just so easy to use. And moreover, Alex and I, since we've been talking about it for so many years, it's one of those things where Anchor is a tool that's just gotten better and better and better each year. And typically there's a tool that overcomes the previous tool and builds on it and makes that tool gets better. But Anchor is something that just increasingly improves with sound quality. And I think sound quality kind of matters when you're recording, because students want to hear their voices clearly. They don't want it to sound junky. And I think that's something we often forget when we're in the classroom and we're trying to have students create these really interesting products, is that sound quality matters. The integration with Spotify, I think, is actually quite important, because it's neat that students love music. Obviously, we know that most students do, at least. And so for them to be able to integrate music and for it to be that one-stop shop, like I talked about, I think makes it such a great tool, because it's beginning to end. Teacher doesn't have to do a whole lot of work on the teacher end. It's all on the students to sort of figure it out. And it's so user-friendly that students can figure it out. And so I was going to drop Anchor and talk just about Zoom, but when I saw how Zoom had improved over the past year, I would say, I was like, I need to be able to share this tool to show people how it's changed and how it's gotten better.
Let me jump in there real quick, Will, to say there's a documentary filmmaker here at Penn State in the College of Communications who have had actually come into the class that you and Alex have guested in, that I teach at Penn State. But when he talks about documentary film, his basic tip for amateur filmmakers is that the sound is more important than the video. So when he says, what are your basic tips for shooting a film? He said, make sure everything can be heard. The sound is way more important than the picture in a documentary film. So I think that backs up what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. And I like the fact, and then Alex, you go ahead and go, and then I'll say my point. I thought you were going to say something.
No, I was just going to mention that all of the performance tasks that I mentioned in my video were all done in person, all using just one mic on a phone.
Yeah.
And I've heard Will share the Anchor app at least last year, but it might have been for the past couple of years. And, it's been on my radar, but actually going through it live with him, I'm a total convert. And I definitely want to use it within some of the podcasting projects that I'm currently working in. But as we're thinking about Zoom and remote learning, that could be, something done asynchronously with students, and having students connect and think through a text or think through a discussion question and submitting their audio file that way. And I think that more than just fixating on the tool, that's a habit that could promote further projects between students around subjects that they already really like. So I learned the most just from doing that with Will, on the spot. He texted me, said, "Hey, do you want to do a segment real quick?" And I was like, "Let's do it." And so, no, it was great. I had a blast.
And I like the fact that you must fit in my head, but showing your phone, because I know a lot of my students, they all have their phone and they can just bang it out right wherever they're walking, and you can use, and thank you, Will, for doing it on the iPad, and just the flexibility I appreciate. And then when I'm thinking about it, like, they can share their learning and their creating meaning in a lot more authentic way, because sometimes like the actual writing of words, like they get stuck, like the blank page on the cursor, and the cursor just freaks them out. But just being able to talk it out, is really exciting. So that frees them up a little bit, which is really, really cool. So I'm excited to try it next week.
And one of the things, go ahead, Jason.
Go ahead, Will. I was just going to say, you go.
I'll go, and then you go. One of the things that I think is really important to remember is that a lot of teachers look for excuses to not do something with technology too. It doesn't take much, right? If we're like, oh, but the internet could go out tomorrow, I shouldn't do an activity, or I shouldn't use this tool because there's just so many things that need to be done. If we could just simplify and show people how easy it is really to do those, I think that's one of the major hurdles. And that was something that was at the front of my mind as I was thinking, like, how would we share this? Because there's nothing wrong with creating a podcast. We could take the video off of this and this could be a podcast, right? And so if you're already in Zoom, have your students talk across a particular topic and have them record that as a podcast. But the authenticity of it also is sort of absent there. Like when we say we're going to use Anchor, which is a podcasting app, we're creating podcasts, y'all. Like, we're going to do a podcast. We're going to add music to it. We're going to have bumpers. You're going to do some sort of fancy introduction and some great closing and have some brilliant thoughts. Like, I think a tool has that possibility, but it can't be just all about the tool, right? It has to be about the content, as Alex was pointing to.
That's a great setup for me, Will, for my comment, which actually ties back to what Alex mentioned as well about, Alex, you made a good point of making this really central to the beginning and the end of your presentation, but don't just do the tool to do the tool, and I know all of us, I think most of us in this panel know Sarah Cater in some way. Like, I know she was your chair, Will, but I know she makes a big point of that in her work with technology, is don't just do podcast to do podcast. Don't just do documentary films or whatever the technology is. Don't just do it to do it. Do it for some sort of purpose, which is what you made a big point of, Alex. And I think, Will, that lends itself well to your point, is what's the purpose of doing this? And even to what you said, Shanetia, about using podcasts as a way to kind of do first drafts, like, rather than be freaked out by the blank page. But I think that ties to what Joe and I are trying to do with the critical listening piece as well, because the same way, Alex, that you said we have to have a purpose for why we would use the technology, I think that's true for what Joe and I are talking about as well, in terms of a lot of the research that we presented. Podcasts are clearly in demand and high interest. Teachers want to bring them into the classroom because people are listening to them and talking about them in real life. But it's not enough just to bring them into the classroom and say, hey, everybody's listening to Serial, unless we do that critically, unless we bring it in and say, are there any problems with the way this is going down? Not just like, hey, great, a million people, a gazillion downloads, and we're listening to it too. It's so much better than a book. It's about the purpose for why we would bring that text in. So I think that's some crossover between the audio composing and the critical listening, is what's the purpose for bringing in these texts as well as bringing in the tools.
Yeah. So can you two, you and Joe, talk about what was the impetus for y'all's project, and just kind of go from there, and then we'll have a chat about it.
Yeah, let me Go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Joe. I was going to say, I'm going to start and then kick it off to you because there's something I want you specifically to talk about. But were you going to say something else?
Oh, I mean, we listen to podcasts, and I think that, especially with the competing truths that happen in the world, these are serving as public pedagogy. Mm-hmm. And what we take as kind of uncritically as this pedagogical text that we are using to make meaning of in the classroom or otherwise can sometimes be problematic. And I think the two that we focused on in our research so far was S-Town and Serial. Particularly S-Town strikes me as one that is an ethnography mm-hmm. of a place that doesn't go under IRB. And what does that mean for the participants, and what does it mean for creating truth in the space that we're currently inhabiting? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's to me the most driving part of the stuff that we're doing, and how we're teaching students to be critical listeners and to be critical podcast creators also, with that in mind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Joe, not to draw us from the conversation, but is that a beehive above your head?
Yes, it is.
Be careful with that, Joe.
Yeah.
Okay.
The point that I think that's a really good general context, but I think some of it, for everyone on this panel, at some point we've dished over nonfiction, right? We've talked about documentaries or series or podcasts or something like that. And that's really where it started for Joe and my two-part discourse analysis is I was doing a lot of work with narrative nonfiction, and of course I talk about it a lot because I'm interested in it. So Joe and I are talking about, some series, some things that we read, and basically there was something that struck me about S-Town. Like in S-Town, for example, it was how Brian Reed interacts with his participants, and something just kind of rubbed me a little bit wrong with it. And I started running it by Joe, and he's like, yeah, there's something here. So what was interesting is we took this idea, this little sort of wondering. I was listening out of my own personal listening. There was something that rubbed me wrong. So it's like, I want to investigate a little bit. So I brought it into conversation with Joe, and he's like, yeah, there's something there. So then we reapplied that pattern and went back through and critically listened to the whole series and pulled out a couple pieces of data to analyze. So that was the same thing with the second one that led to the second part. So as we were talking about this, I came up with this term, which I'm calling fortuitous listening. This idea that as we're listening and watching and we're thinking critically and we're wearing our different hats and moving between our different roles, sometimes we stumble upon these moments that are like, wait, that there's something we need to investigate a little bit there. I think there's more meaning there. So it's like starting from the listener hat and then moving sort of into the teacher hat and moving into the literacy researcher hat and kind of moving between those spaces. So Joe turned me on to a piece by Sven Brinkman, Stumble Data. So that's what I was going to kick back to you, Joe, to talk about Stumble Data. I mean, I know we talked about it in our presentation, so we don't have to rehash it too much, but
I mean, to me, that's a whole lot of what qualitative methods does, particularly kind of less traditional qualitative methods. It's like we stumble upon this, and it's both the data that we trip over and the data that makes us stop for a minute and really kind of consider this thing that came about in a way that we hadn't thought of, right? Because we were just listening to a podcast. We weren't doing research. We were listening to a podcast, and it became this kind of sticky moment that we wanted to investigate further. And that leads to all sorts of ways of interacting and thinking more critically. And what does it mean to think more critically about doing this kind of active listening, I guess. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask a question of y'all? And this could be answered by anybody. The thing I always worry about when we do this is the fear of colonizing a literacy inside of a school space that otherwise belonged maybe not to youth culture necessarily. There may not be a whole lot of maybe middle school and high school students who listen to podcasts. There very well may be, but I wonder what's the cautionary tale here? What's the line we walk when we are trying to teach a critical listening skill and without making it like, oh, I got to study something that I otherwise used to really enjoy, just sort of tuning out and enjoying in the background. Can you all talk about some of your thoughts around that? I'm just intrigued by your thinking with that.
Yeah, I'd be curious, Alex. I know you do a lot of youth literacy type of stuff, so I'd be curious your thoughts on this. So I'm gonna put you in the queue here, but like my initial thought, I think that's a great question, Will. I think there's like this idea of like when we bring it into the classroom, like you said, it's kind of like, oh man, this was our thing like outside of school. We don't want to do this in the classroom. So I think some of it's the teacher's approach. Like I don't think in my classrooms. I definitely wouldn't create traditional assessments like tests or something. I feel like the way that we would discuss it would be a little bit more organic. And I actually have used podcasts with high school students in that way. So I think it does foster some conversation that's a little bit more authentic, a little bit in the ways that we talk in our own kind of social conversation. So I think there's that aspect to it, the way that you approach it. But I also think like what you're saying is this sort of colonizing these like youth literacies, out of school literacies, like there's a danger there, but like it's in my mind, it's competing against what we might call hegemony, right? Which is like some of these podcasts and documentaries, like Tiger King, for example. Like I don't know what you all thought of that, but I thought it was pretty problematic in certain ways. Definitely entertaining, but certainly problematic. And it's like if we don't sort of gently at least encourage or foster a critical environment where we bring some attention to like, hey, this is really fun to watch, this is really fun to listen to, but are there problems here? Like what stereotypes are being reified, what stereotypes are being reinforced, in what ways are the just kind of looking at that meta moment, right? Like how are the hosts and filmmakers and podcasters looking at their subjects, So I feel like there's a way to get at it without kind of killing the joy of it, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that kind of hit me was when Joe was kind of characterizing S-Town as an ethnography, and that really hit home to me. And I think that maybe if you look at podcasting as a genre, and then you think about how might students be able to apply those critical listening skills and considerations of authorship in spaces which they inhabit on a daily basis. So adults really like podcasting because we listen to the car, we listen to it on the way to and from work. But kids very often like going on YouTube and watching like playthroughs. They'll watch hours of someone playing through a game and living in that world. And I think that the metaphor of, ethnography works super well there as well. And thinking about what would it mean to talk through and think about the authorship of these video game worlds, and kind of using that as a text in the same way that, NPR or the New York Times might have the resources to send investigative journalists around the country. Kids are living in these other worlds on a day-to-day basis. And what might that mean to take the tools of Anchor, take the critical listening and thinking tools of podcasting and apply it to other spaces? I think there's a potential for transfer there.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. And if you have questions, give us a shout on our Twitter handle. You can put them up there, Jason. Oh, sorry. Okay, awesome.